Hey guys, welcome back to another airgun video. Today we're going to take an in-depth look at the EDgun Lelya 2.0, a new bullpup in the 2018 model year. That is an evolution of a gun that came out several years ago, and this is technically the third generation of Lelya. I'll show you the second generation technically, which is this little guy right here. And I do have a review on my channel of the EDgun Lelya 2, technically, or second generation bullpup. This one's quite a bit different. There were some really cool things, and it's probably like one of the neatest looking guns ever built, with the two little finger holes, and the stock is just outrageous, but very hard to shoot. It had a single shot action, which you had to cock by pulling this action back, which kept everything nice and slick. But everyone always thought it would be so incredible if this gun was made with side cocking lever. So the Lelya 2 was born, or 2.0 was born. Some significant changes on this gun versus the other model, and particularly it's a little bit longer. That other model lacked a little bit of power, for especially in 25 caliber, and this one here does not. This is a full powered 45 foot-pound 25 caliber with a good shot count for its size. Very good. Extremely quiet, has a nice big giant moderator on it, and the gun is actually very easy to shoot. Has an extreme amount of functionality in the gun. And one of the things is this forend, which I think is sometimes one of the best things, is when something happens by accident. That forend absolutely helps you freehand shoot this gun. Now, I am well known in my shooting circles as a terrible freehand shooter. I'm always looking for a tree, a bush, a fence post, something to lean the gun on. This is the first time that I can grab a gun and legitimately pop squirrels at 80, 90 yards. And I'll show you in a video later that I'm able to do it totally, completely freehand. And this gun is just very well balanced. One of the things that makes that happen is the stalker scope, and that's because the weight stays dead center. And so the moment of inertia, which is how we measure a gun's balance, let's take a look at its form and function and talk about all its features it has. Of course, it has a side cocking lever. The side cocking lever definitely gets smoother over time, but it does not possess mechanical advantage. Now, the reason why it doesn't possess mechanical advantage is, in order to get mechanical advantage, you'd have to put a bunch of linkages here, and that would destroy the durability of the gun. First comes out, and that is that it's going to be a pure field gun, a hard use field gun, something that you might bang around but won't lose zero. So it does have a side cocking lever. The side cocking lever actuates a lever that slides through the back here. As I take this apart, I'll show you. And it spins the magazine. It's very easy to use. The straight pull is very quick. With this gun, you're able to stay on target. I like that it has a lever on both sides, and that's not just for a left or right-handed shooter, because it can depend on how you're shooting, whether or not your strong or weak side will operate the lever. If you're a right-handed shooter and you're shooting freehand, a lot of times it's easier, like a biathlon rifle, to take your trigger hand off, maintain a purchase point on the front. For a right-handed shooter that's got it in a bag or sitting out of a car window, it's easier to operate the left side instead of the right side. So that's one of the nice features about that. That's not just for left-handed shooters. It can function both very well. Moving on to the gun itself, it has a very effective moderator. We'll decock this so I don't drop the hammer by accident. It has a very effective moderator. That's one of the things that Ed promised, and I'll go ahead and show it to you. It's very similar to like an EDgun Lelya, in that it has basically a canister with a little O-ring, and we'll go ahead and pull it out now. And you can see how effective that is. Now, this operates not just as a moderator, but you can see the shape of these baffles inside here. and the shape of those baffles actually disturb the airflow. And what's interesting is that the airflow is disturbed from here, stripped backwards, and pushed out of these holes right here. This does two things. It reduces noise, obviously, but the second thing is it stabilizes the pellet. Because the air, once this pellet has left the barrel, air is no longer useful anymore, and we want to get rid of it as quickly as possible. And then, of course, it has a moderator cover. And when I have this off, this is how you get to the barrel, and I'll show you how to clean it in a second. Interesting thing is this barrel lug. If you look at the size of it, that's 12 millimeters. If you can look inside there, I mean, that's the size of a VW Bug almost, and that helps tension the barrel. So this entire system up here is free floated. It's attached to a transfer port in the rear, which I will pull out for you right now. This is a tension barrel, and this barrel tensioning system attaches the transfer port. One of the things that is inferior with a lot of guns, in my opinion, is the transfer port is drilled actually into the barrel. This requires the barrel to be oriented perfectly, and it also disturbs the airflow, which means the gun's not as efficient. If this gun had a hole drilled in the barrel, it would not get the shot count with the power that it has. So, as I mentioned, this 12 millimeter lug, it attaches to the front, which is the shorter thread side. This is obviously a barrel for a long. And then the rear transfer port, if you take a look here, screws into the back. And then this little notch orientates the barrel into the action. And as you can see here, it's got a rotary transfer port. That rotary transfer port breathes extremely well and doesn't waste any air, and will send the pellet flying with a much lower air usage. So this regulator can actually be set at a much lower pressure, all the way down to 100 bar, which most modern guns have their regulator set at 150, which I think is a huge mistake that manufacturers make. And one of the things that makes the EDgun able to run such a low regulator pressure is this transfer port that breathes so well. So this system together tensions the barrel, and the importance of that tension barrel is that this air tube no longer affects point of impact, which happens with a lot of guns. Air tubes are designed to stretch as pressure increases in them, and so when they're attached with two barrel bands that go around the air tube, a lot of times they put different pressure points on the barrel and can affect point of impact. This is why Ed abandoned this design 10 years ago and went through a free-floated tension barrel system with an air rifle in a bullpup configuration. Okay, so moving back to the rear of the gun and functioning it, you can see here it has a safety. Now what's interesting about this safety, or important about this safety, is that it's a true trigger block. Now, one thing is, the gun cannot cock with the safety on because there's a bar that actually flips up and sits right behind the hammer, and it actually grabs the claw of the hammer. So when the safety is in the rear position, as you can see, it will not allow the hammer to be cocked. So you have to be in a fire position in order to cock it. While I'm on the back side here, I'll flip back. This little piece right here is for a single point sling. I'm going to flip it to the other side here. One feature that is maintained with the EDgun is the magazine disconnect feature. I get a lot of questions on what this lever is for. This lever is a holdover from the R3M version. And what this lever is a magazine disconnect. And what it does is it actually pulls the actuating arm away from the magazine so that the magazine doesn't operate. So, why would you use this, or how would you use it? Let's say you had a magazine loaded, and you decided that you didn't want to shoot anymore and you don't want to waste the pellet in the ground for whatever reason, and you want to make the gun totally safe. And you can put it on safe here, but to totally make the gun safe, the best thing always to do is to decock it. So this is basically an anti-double feed feature that's manual. So you would then push this lever down, and what I do, if I've done this, I leave this lever down the entire time as a reminder that there's going to be a pellet in the chamber of the barrel. So now with the lever down, you go ahead and actuate the cocking arm, hand on the handle, pull the trigger, and let the action go forward. What you have is a pellet that's sitting in the breech. So what I do is I leave it, and I know on my personal gun, if I see this lever down, I know that there's a pellet in the breech. Then what I do is when I'm ready to shoot, I cock, pull the trigger, shoot, pull the lever up, and now the magazine will actuate again. Okay, so that's the magazine disconnect feature, or the anti-double load feature. Alright, so let's take apart the stock and let's take a look underneath here. So to get the stock off, it's a 4mm hex. Pull the screw out of the rear. And then this one doesn't have a trigger guard. The screw is actually inside the stock here. And now you can lift the stock away. And it's very important that you leave that little metal piece in there, or the stock won't sit correctly on this, or the action won't sit correctly on the stock. Looking at the air tube here, we have just underneath it is the connecting arm to the sear. Now, I've mentioned in other videos, I do not want you to adjust this arm to adjust your first or second stage trigger. The way the trigger works is the first screw is a stopper, the second screw is the weight. You can adjust the weight so much that the safety will no longer work, and that means you've adjusted it over too much and it's unsafe. So back it off a couple turns. But do not turn this turnbuckle. The reason being is, if you look in the back here, right here, this little window here is your sear contact window, and that tells you how much contact you need. And you need 7/100 of a millimeter in contact between the sear and the hammer, or it won't engage or won't consistently engage. And that contact is affected by this rod. So my recommendation is, when you get a gun from me, please leave the rod alone. To adjust the power of this, use the hammer spring tensioner, the silver piece. It's a 10mm hex head, and turning it counterclockwise will increase the speed, clockwise will decrease the speed. Now the reason why it's opposite is that it actually operates a cam. The reason why it operates a cam is this strut is attached in here. If it didn't operate a cam and run this cam backwards, what would happen is the strut would get longer and longer and longer, and you would basically run out of the ability to adjust it because the strut would get in the way of your hex wrench. So this strut runs backwards as a result of that. This is your hammer spring tensioner, as I said. Counterclockwise to increase speed, clockwise to decrease the speed or tension. And I think that pretty much covers the other part of it. Let's go ahead and take the air tube out. But I want to first show you how to take the air tube off properly on this gun. Very first thing you want to do before you take the air tube out is you want to cock it. The very next thing you want to do, sequence, is throw it on safe. And the reason why you're going to do that is I don't ever want this hammer to drop when there's no valve in place. There are parts that are inside here that can bend and break, and if you let that hammer drop when that valve's not in place, it can be a very long day, and we'll have to punch out all these little punches and replace parts, which is just something that's so preventable. So please use the safety when you're doing this. Even if you don't use the safety while you shoot, just go ahead and put it on safe. It's much easier to pull this air tube off when it's cocked. You're going to take a 4mm hex wrench and you're going to go counterclockwise with it. You're going to loosen it, push it in a lower position, and then set the sled on the bottom of the action. Then all you got to do is just pull it out like so, and now we have an air tube which we can work on, fix leaks, change the regulator setting if we want to, or whatever you need to do. So to put it back, all we're going to do is we're going to align the transfer port, which is this little thing right here. we're going to line the transfer port north, or to the top part. And we don't have to use the bottle trick on this gun that Ed has shown on his other videos, because there is no moderator in the way. So remember, it's much easier on a cocked gun. Once it's in this position, what you're going to do is set it on its side at a 45-degree angle, and it will slide right in, just like that. So once again, set it so that it sits on the sled, turn it to a 45-degree angle, pull your fingers up, and it'll slide right in. Now you're going to tighten it. You're going to loosen it first. Take your finger, pull the sled up, and tighten it. Now it doesn't have to be wrenched down super tight, because I don't want you to break something because you think it has to be super tight. This has some mechanical advantage like a jack screw, so it will lift the transfer port up, so you don't have to worry about that. Alright, so now let's talk about cleaning the gun. Again, really important that you put it on safe. So the first thing you do, cock the gun, put it on safe. When it's cocked, as we can see here, the actuating arm moves easily because you don't have to overcome the spring tension of the hammer. So what we're going to do is take a 4mm hex head. Most of the bolts on here that you need to do are 4mm. So if you had to, you can keep a 4mm wrench in your car or in your bag, and it'll fit almost everything in the car. A 4 and a 10mm, that's all you need for field use. So we have pulled the rear screw out of the back. Now you just pull the action off. Let's turn it over and so you can see the little key mark. The O-ring comes right out. And as you can see here, the little key mark, or the little keyhole, that's the part that moves the action. So now, remember, once you look inside here, you can see the parts that are inside. And this is why I want you to have the safety on. You'll never drop a hammer with this safety. As you can see, the bar right there is grabbing the hammer. So to clean the gun, we're going to take the moderator off just like we have here. We are going to take something, I like either fishing line or this cool little tool here you can use if you got one, or weed whacker cord. But you're going to run the cord from the muzzle down. If you're going to use a rod, you're going to start from the breech. Then you just put your patch on here, your favorite cleaning solution like Blistol, and you're going to pull out to the back. Once it's clean, you'll replace your O-ring, and I'm going to show you a little trick here for replacing your O-ring so it won't drop down when you go to put it back on. You're going to take a little tiny bit of silicone lube, and you're going to put it on the O-ring. And that silicone lube, what it's going to do is cause it to stick inside your transfer port. So you won't have to worry about it falling and dropping down inside the action when you go to put this back together. Now, you're going to run the cocking arm so it's about midway. I find this to be the easiest. Run the cocking arm so it's about midway. If it's all the way back, what happens is this action here, it sits behind the action block and it's very difficult to install. So just run the action about midway like that. Put the two pieces together. As you can see, when you run it midway, it goes in super easy. Now you're just going to replace your 4mm hex head. Always start your threads, make sure you don't strip them. And this I want you to firm up pretty good, or pretty well I should say. One other feature I meant to mention here that I haven't is you can see the magazine holders. One thing that's nice about the magazine holders is these things are made very well. And by the way, this rail is an integral part. You can see it's here. It's all machined one piece. It's excellent. I love the machining of this gun. And the magazines sit and they hold perfectly right here. And look at how well they fit. I mean, that is just, I love that. That's super cool. So, you always have 4 magazines with you, 1 in the breech, 3 in here. Now we can put the gun back together. So first you're going to do is put the shroud cover on, like so. Start the thread slowly and make sure they grab. You don't want to cross thread these, they're very thin. And if you remember the 12mm hex in there, this piece is going to line up so that your offset lines up. And just basically put it in until it drops. You'll feel it. Replace your O-ring on top. And again, with these thin threads, start slowly. You can see how little force I use to get them spinning. And of course, just hand tight. And now we're going to put our stock back on. So now to put the stock back on, you're going to notice there's going to be two on the Matador. They're both the same size. On the Lelya, one's longer than the other. The long one goes in the front, so the short one goes in the rear. And I usually put the short one in first because it helps align the front one. As you can see, it pushes the stock forward, and it makes it so it's easier to line. The long one goes in through the bottom here. And now we're good to go. Okay, and that's pretty much it for the Lelya. You know, it's not as long as some of my other videos, but really the gun is not that complicated. My overall impression of this gun is very awesome. I love it. So let's go ahead and take it to the chronograph and see what it shoots. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quick way to load the EDgun pellets in the magazine. Take your hand and make a little circle. Dump the pellets in and shake them. And as you can see, they will orientate themselves correctly. Just take your fingers and push them in. And then make sure they've all seated properly. Once you get them past the skirt, just give it a quick little tap like that. And now all the pellets will be properly seated and they won't catch on the action when you're cycling it. Now to load the magazine, what we're going to do is obviously cock it. You're going to take the skirts to the rear, place the magazine inside, align the detent with this little notch right here in the action. You're going to slide the magazine in and you might hear a double click like this. Make sure that the magazine is in the out position, not in, but out like that. And time it one time so you can feel the notch. Once it's timed, then you're ready to shoot. Let's go ahead and take a look at some chronograph numbers. Okay, so right around 883, that's probably the top end of this gun that I've noticed. Not the top end, it's about 5 to 7 feet per second off the top end, so you're pretty close to the top peak. I choose to run my gun at around 865 to 870, just so I can stay off that peak of the regulator a little bit more. What that helps me do is gain a few more shots, and sometimes that's important when you're out doing pest control. Totally your call, depending on how often you want to fill, how many shots you want to get. On average, I get about 4 magazines, which is about 32 shots, 36 shots, depending on my fill, from about a 250 bar fill. So 4 magazines, refill it. So it's kind of slick. Your gun holds 4, 3 on the rail, 1 in the chamber. When you run through 4 mags, you don't even really need to look at the gauge. It's just time to refill. Well, that concludes part 1 of the Lelya video, the overview. Here's a preview of the next video, which will be target shooting and accuracy. I've decided to break the videos up into 3 pieces to kind of make them a little bit shorter and more succinct. So the first was just the tabletop, the next will be target shooting and some fun shooting, the last one will be hunting. So I hope you enjoy it. Thanks again for watching.